Well, welcome everyone. I hope everyone's having a wonderful afternoon. How you doing? Good, good. You know, teachers, this is how we start, right? We start by building community, getting a sense of the room. Well, I am thrilled to be able to have this conversation with both Rodney and Kurt. And to get us started, I'm just going to have you both do the quick 1 minute, this is who I am, this is what I teach, that kind of thing. All right? Kurt, do you want to start?
Yes, thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you for being here this afternoon. My name is Kurt Russell. I'm from the state of Ohio, from a small little OH. All right. I teach history at a small school in Ohio, Oberlin. You might have heard of Oberlin College before. I'm a 25-year veteran of the classroom, and I teach history.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
And Rodney.
I'm Rodney Robinson. I was 2019 National Teacher of the Year. I taught for 20 years, history, social studies in Richmond City Public Schools. After my Teacher of the Year, I crossed over to the dark side and in central administration. I'm a senior advisor in the talent office, mainly in charge of teacher and leader pathways.
Wonderful. It's so good to be in conversation with both of you. And I'm Sarah Brown Wessling. I'm the 2010 National Teacher of the Year and a 25-year veteran of the classroom. I'm a high school English teacher at Johnston, Iowa, up until about the last year and a half. And now I'm directing the National Teacher of the Year program, which is really what brings all three of us together. The National Teacher of the Year program, which is run by the Council of Chief State School Officers, works to celebrate and elevate amazing teachers around the country every year. And that is what has connected the three of us and is going to kind of start off our conversation today. So I gotta say, I love a good origin story. I'm a bit of a Marvel fan. I've got 3 kids of my own, and we spend a lot of time watching Marvel. I know that both of you were profoundly influenced by different folks who got you into the teaching profession. And I wondered if you could share just a little bit about what got you into the teaching profession. Kurt, do you want to start?
Of course. 1978, I was a kindergarten student at Eastwood Elementary School. And my kindergarten teacher was this middle-aged white lady. Her name was Miss Francine Toss. And Miss Toss one day decided to read a book. Like many kindergarten teachers, read books. We sat around her rocking chair. And she said, I'm going to read a book about a young boy. And she started to open up the picture book, and each page was a person that looked like me. She said, this was a story about Martin. And she continued to open up the book. And once again, let me say, this was 1978. In Miss Toss' kindergarten class, there was 15 students, 13 students of color, and 12 black students. And each page she turned the book, this was a story about Martin. And it was a story about Martin Luther King Jr. in 1978. This was before the holiday, before Martin Luther King Jr. was this iconic figure. And Miss Toss was so intentional about making sure that her students saw themselves in the classroom. And from there, in kindergarten, I fell in love with just stories and fell in love with people biographies and just fell in love with the idea of being a teacher one day. And once again, this was in 1978 as a kindergarten student.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I mean, that's amazing to kind of like have that sense and that like purpose at such a young age. We need to have that, all over the country, right?
Most definitely.
Absolutely. Rodney, I also love your story of how you came into this profession and especially what influenced you to pursue this work.
Okay, first of all, I just got to notice like the school dynamic going on here. All the cool kids are sitting in the back chilling. The front rows are kind of empty, But I appreciate my front row people, but it's all good. No, I got into, I often say the best teacher I had only had a sixth grade education the majority of her life, and that was my mother. You know, my mother grew up in rural Virginia. She wanted to be a teacher, but she never got the chance due to segregation and poverty growing up in that environment. But she never let that stop her. You know, she ran an in-home daycare. She lived by the motto of take care of community. And she would tell everybody in the community, if you need childcare, drop your kids off, bring something to eat if you got it, and pick them up that evening. And so there were days where I would wake up and there'd be 2, 3 other kids in the bed next to me. And I'm like, where they come from, Ma? You know, but she was just like, don't worry about it. Miss Johnson needed somebody to watch her kids while she went out of town for the day. And so just growing up in that environment, taking care of community, and then the other lessons like Rodney, ride your bike down the road, make sure Mr. Johnson got wood. You know, Stephen, go down the road and make sure that someone cut Miss Johnson grass. It's just those lessons of community in my household, but also lessons of equity because I had a sister with cerebral palsy. And my mother would always say, I don't love you any less than your sister. Your sister just requires more of my time and attention. And so growing up in that environment, I was always inspired to live out her dream and become an actual licensed teacher, even though she was a teacher, but not by the license standards. But she was the best teacher I ever had. And so I always say I'm fulfilling her dream every day in the classroom.
I love the way, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I love the way that you were inspired as students and as young people, right, to find your way into the classroom. You know, the other side of that is you also are both really fierce advocates of student voice in your classrooms and in your education spaces. So I'm really curious what your students have taught you that we could all learn from.
To be bold and to be courageous. A few years ago, maybe 3 years ago, I had a student in my first period U.S. history class. And this student was not totally engaged in the class. We were studying.
You mean students aren't all naturally engaged in class?
I know.
Not in the National
That's
Teacher
right.
of the Year's classroom?
Most definitely. And so this student was just not really engaged about learning the Revolutionary War, so forth and so on. That was first period. Fourth period, I had the same student in African American history class. And I could not keep that student from raising his hand. And that student was so impactful in my teaching because that student showed what a single story could do to you, where you become sullen, you become quiet, you become unengaged. And when you add that second tier story, that narrative that they bring, then that students become so engaged and so inspired. And that student showed me what boldness and being courageous looked like because every single day in fourth period, that student could not keep from talking, discussing, and sharing his story in the classroom and being bold about it. Being bold. I think, Rodney, you have to agree that as a classroom teacher, it's so important to give students a voice and to be bold about it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Rodney?
I mean, I learned so much from my students, you know. I mean, I think the biggest lesson I learned my students is keep it real. You know, my students grew, you know, from Southside Richmond, Virginia, East End Richmond, Virginia. For those of you who don't know, those are communities that have been historically, economically segregated from the rest of the city. And so they taught me about authenticity. You know, show up as your genuine self, no matter who you are. You know, I always say when teachers come to me, especially, white teachers come up to me every year, like, how do I relate to the kids? Be yourself.
Yes.
Because one thing about our kids, they're going to check you. They're going to tell you if you're not being authentic with them. So no matter what you're into, lean into it, embrace it, because that's what you're gonna get from your kids. But I've just learned so many things, from little lessons, just little things about life, how to do certain TikTok, all that crap. But the more important lessons, I remember specifically 2015, I was starting to suffer from burnout a little bit, and I wanted a change of scenery. And so I decided I would move to a juvenile detention center. And I wasn't too keen on that idea at first. But then I remember 2015, that's when the U.S. Department of Education released their first comprehensive study on the school-to-prison pipeline. And so I figured, what better way to learn about the school-to-prison pipeline than to go inside an actual juvenile prison and learn from the kids. And I remember, because I was lost. I was in the weeds a little bit, and I was thinking, it's a school to, poverty to prison pipeline. School just takes the blame, and I had all these ideas. But I remember my first class, first day at the juvenile detention center. First class walks in. First 3 kids are kids that I had just taught at my comprehensive school that I had failed. And so I was like, oh, this is what the school to prison pipeline is. I failed those kids, and they are right here in the jail. And so I learned, that was an eye-opening, sobering moment, and I learned so much from just discipline practices, grading practices, truancy policies, so many things in our schools that we are doing that contribute to the school to prison pipeline. And so from that, I've learned to develop programs, curriculum, all sorts of things, advocacy work, into helping to end the school to prison pipeline. So I learn from them. I often say, I don't want the mic. I want to hold the mic up in front of my students and magnify their voices. And that's what I learned from them.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And Sarah, do you mind if I add something to that? And also, and Rodney made a great point of really amplifying student voices, but also students taught me how to be humble, humility in terms of teaching. Teaching is a service of humility. And a funny story, when I was selected National Teacher of the Year, my school district was so kind enough to name the drive going into the high school as Kurt Russell Lane. Right, so going to the high school, there's a little drive, and my students, I'm not in the classroom this year, and my students really checked me on something. They say, Mr. Russell, please do not get your head big, because it's just a drive. It's not an avenue, it's not a major street. It's just a little drive. And I think that is so key, that as we continue to do this work, that we have to remain humble and make sure we keep our students at the forefront of everything we do. So it's not a drive, Rodney. It's not an avenue. It's just a little drive.
It's a lane.
It's a little late.
I love that. So, one of the misconceptions folks might have about National Teachers of the Year is that they don't have bad days, or that their classrooms are like movies or something like that, right? So I'm curious, if you could maybe talk about a mistake that you made in the classroom, and how you learned from it, or how you get through a bad day.
Rodney, go right ahead.
It's funny because I remember when I was named Teacher of the Year, one of my kids started a Facebook post and just telling stories about me. And I was up to 4 a.m. reading these stories, and half of them I was so embarrassed that I actually did or said this. And it was just one of those moments, and I DM'd the kids please delete this thread before somebody catches it. But I've just learned so much. And I think one of those pivotal moments was I had a student one day where I gave them progress reports, and the student, smart kid, but he never did his work. never did his work. Extremely smart kid. He just take tests and, and I gave him his report and he had a D. And this kid lost it on me. Called me everything, words I could not repeat, And so the principal's like, well, he needs to be suspended, and I was like, nah, technically he was right. If he's demonstrated all this mastery of my subject, why did I give him a D? And so that really caused me to question my grading practices, Now, of course, he had to apologize because like I said, he called me everything but a child of God that day. But I learned from him that, wait a minute, if a student can demonstrate mastery of the subject, why am I so beholden to this antiquated grading system that we have in our classroom? And so I've made so many mistakes as an educator. But I often live by the thing that you have to learn from your mistakes. Yep. If you're the same educator tomorrow that you are today, then you failed because you haven't learned anything to move on.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yes, most definitely.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that I really learned is time. That time management. And the biggest mistake, which I continue to make, is time, and especially providing my students with ample time that they deserve. Sometimes as educators, we are so much in a rush that we need to move from this lesson to this lesson, content-based information. And we move so fast sometimes where students are not necessarily learning. And what I decided to do, which has totally helped, is to provide my students with ample time to learn. Ample time to learn. That means if we have to spend a few days over a topic that should probably take maybe a day, but my students are not getting it because maybe my instruction is not well, then I need to go back and revisit. And that's what I do so often now, is to revisit and give my students ample time to learn. But it's a process.
It is a process. And this is one of the things about teaching and about education. Like, the same lessons are going to keep coming back to you until you decide to learn them, right? The students are going to still, I've had the moments too. I've had students throw their papers at me and call me all the things, right? And it's just, because we have to learn the lessons that our students are trying to teach us. It's so important.
And also to show our students grace.
Yeah.
And I think Rodney mentioned that in terms of his story, where his student was correct. He or she learned, masters a subject, and a lot of times we don't show students grace, where everyone has a bad day.
Right.
Everyone is frustrated, and of course there have to be some consequences. But at the same time, we need to make sure that these are humans and that we need to treat them as such.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'll piggyback off that saying, you always have to learn and adapt. Always be willing to change. I've had days where, I have 5 classes, same lesson, I had to teach it different every period because each classroom has its own unique personality, or you just teach a lesson first period and it just completely bombs. And so you're like, hold up, I got a planning period, let me redo this entire thing and come back out and try it again. And then lunch, you may have to adjust some again. That's what it's all about. It's all about adjusting to meet the needs of the students, because the students change. Students change from period to period, day to day. You just have to constantly keep changing to make sure that you're meeting their needs.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the National Teacher of the Year program has been around since 1952. Kurt, you are the 70th National Teacher of the Year, right? And both of you are part of a very small but important cohort of 4 Black male educators who have been named National Teacher of the Year in these 70 years. I also want to be sure that yes, absolutely. I also want to be sure that we name James Rogers from 1972. He was a teacher in North Carolina, and Thomas Fleming from 1992, who is a teacher in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So I'm curious what it means for you to be a National Teacher of the Year as a Black male educator.
It means so much, not necessarily, Sarah, for me, but so much for the culture. There has been absolutely phenomenal Black educators that I had in my life. Mr. Larry Thomas, Mr. Eugene Davis, the list goes on and on. And those individuals, of course, were not National Teacher of the Year, but National Teacher of the Year to me.
Yeah.
And as I selected this journey or awarded this journey, the one thing I noticed is it's my intention to try to amplify Black teachers, Black male teachers. 2%, I think we know the statistics, and it's important not necessarily for the recognition of myself, and maybe Rodney could allude to this as well, but it's so important to recognize the struggle, the importance, and the impact that Black teachers have on students of all races, of all color, ethnicities. What we bring to the classroom is an experience like no other. We bring our own culture, we bring our own style, which all students could learn from. And so just to amplify the culture of Black teachers has been really, really impactful for me, exciting for me, and just humble for me as well. And I think that's really what being a Black National Teacher of the Year really means to me. Rodney?
First of all, I think we need to notice the years. 72, 92, then a nice little jump to 2019, 2022. You know, that's important to me because we are being recognized, not just, you know, it was funny when you were named when I was named National Teacher of the Year, people was like, man, we ain't gonna have another brother for another 20, 30 years, you know? But to have you come along 3 years later, that really, you know, I was like, you know, that's why we do this. But it just means so much to the people, to the culture, you know. And I often tell the state teachers of the year, you know, National Teachers of the Year, whoever, if you are one of a few or you come from an underappreciated, under-recognized background, lean into it because you never know who you may inspire or who's looking up to you. And it's weird, you know, you have these moments, because I'll be honest, you know, we up here smiling. Being Black National Teacher of the Year ain't all it's cracked up to be some days, and especially in some situations, you know. But there are these little cultural moments. I remember I was leaving, this is after I was named, I was on Capitol Hill meeting with congressmen, and we were getting into a taxi, and there was a guy that pulls up beside me. He's like, hey, bro, don't I know you? I don't know. He's like, you that teacher dude. Yeah, man, yeah, that's what's up. You know? I was like, yeah, appreciate it. And then we go down like 2 lights later, we look, he's holding up an iPad that he uses to take receipts in his taxi, but he's taking a picture of me at the light because he's so excited, you know? And then that was when we had the World Teacher of the Year was a Kenyan, and he was talking about how the guys from his village and how it's so important to see Black men in roles we typically do not see them. You know, society has done a number on the image of the Black male. And so to actually stand up in front of our students and show them this is what you can be, to show them that this is the way to counteract all the negative stereotypes, the negative images that you've seen of Black men, Black people, people of color on TV and in society, that's what it means to actually stand there and to say, I am here, even in situations where, as Black male National Teacher of the Year, you weren't welcome. I still got to go there and stand and say, I am here, you will respect me like you respected everyone else. And so that's what it means to me, is just to represent for the culture, represent for the people, but represent for all educators who feel like they have not had a voice at the table. Because I'm going to speak at the table, and to quote, old civil rights saying, sometimes you got to flip the MF over if people aren't listening. But that's what it means to me, to be at that table to represent those folks.
Absolutely. And it just strikes me also that what you both are talking about is what Mr. Thomas was for you, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and so we see the importance of it, right? The cyclical importance of it.
And the representation of
Absolutely,
it, yes.
absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit more about your classroom, Kurt.
Yes.
So you've been a classroom teacher for 25 years, a high school social studies
Yes.
teacher. Kurt teaches amazing classes. I've actually been able to see him teach, which is a really cool thing. And you teach classes like African American history, race, culture, and oppression. And you've spent a lot of time talking about how important it is to diversify the curriculum.
Yes.
Can you talk about why that's essential work and what your message about diversifying the curriculum has been?
Sarah, because number one, we live in a diverse society. And so curriculum, society, in my opinion, has to mirror one another. And so you cannot have young learners leave your classroom without having specific knowledge for them to be successful. And I teach courses that is relevant to our climate. So I teach African American history, and a few years ago started a course that's called Race, Gender, and Oppression. Now in this particular class, we have 5-6 major units. Everything from women's studies to Black Lives Matter to LGBTQ+, so forth and so on, immigration, economic oppression. Why is that? Well, it's because what my students is gaining from the classes is relevant for them outside of the classroom. And it's so important that every single student, and when I say every single student, I mean every single student, should see themselves in the classroom, should see themselves in the lesson. So how dare I teach the Revolutionary War without highlighting women contributions? How dare I teach the Civil War without highlighting the accomplishments of African Americans, right? There's no one in this audience that will be engaged in a classroom if you do not see yourself in there. I know I wouldn't be, so maybe I should speak for myself. The most boring classes I ever been in were classes that I did not see myself into. That's why I love Miss Francine Toss, my kindergarten teacher, because she showed me who I was in her classroom. And so that's why diversifying curriculum is so important. And from a teacher standpoint, if you want to talk about curving behavior in the classroom, you curb behavior by allowing students to be a part of the classroom. So you won't have any behavioral problems if students see themselves in the classroom because they're so engaged.
Right.
They're so engaged, yes.
Yeah, and that's really important, because without that cultural piece, without knowledge of self, you're lost.
Yeah.
I grew up in rural Virginia, King William County, and I remember people asked me, what was unique about your education experience? I was like, I got a good academic education. Problem was, I had no idea of who I was as a young black person. And it's not just me, every black kid who came through that school system. First thing we did soon as we graduated, all of us ran straight to HBCUs, because we need to know who we are and what was our role. And shout out to Virginia State University. I always gonna shout out my HBCU. But I tell people ask me, why did I go to an HBCU? There's no diversity. And I would tell them, honestly, HBCU campuses are some of the most diverse places on earth. It's diversity of thought. I went to school, I had liberals, I had conservatives, I had Christians, Muslims, atheists, Jews. We had everybody at that campus, and it allowed us to grow into our identities without our skin color being the defining characteristic of who we are. And so that's why I think it's important to have that curriculum diversity, because if you don't have it, you are raising people who will never know what it's like to participate in the society and know who you are and be confident in what you could be. And I remember one time I was at Yale University some years ago on this panel, and like these people were, typical Yale historians going on, and I'm challenging them about what they're thinking, and it's like, where did you learn that? And I was like, Virginia State University, because Virginia State University taught me that I belong in this room. No matter whether it's Ivy League, whether it's boardrooms, whether it's Supreme Court, you as a black person, you belong in these rooms. And so all our curriculum must empower our kids and have them believe in that, no matter if they're black, brown, gay, straight, whatever. You always have to see what you want to be so that you can say, I belong where I'm going to be.
That's great. And Sarah, if you don't mind, if I could just piggyback with what Rodney said. Also, what is so impactful about diversifying the curriculum, that it really does show and teach us empathy, right? When you know someone's struggle because you have learned that in the classroom, then you develop empathy for others. And I think that is so, so important. And it will probably help us in this political climate that we are facing if we have a little more empathy and we can learn that within our classrooms.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what I hear from both of you is the more we center our students' identities in their education, the more they are seen, the more they are involved, and ultimately, this is an extension of love, yes. Right? This is a way that we love our students.
Can't love anybody if you don't see who they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most definitely.
So Rodney, you said that you went to the dark side and joined the administrative staff. But I would push back on that just a little bit and say how incredibly important it is for us to have teachers like you who move into those spaces and don't forget your teacher self, but you take your full teacher self into that space. And that's what I see you doing in all of the work that you do. I'm really curious about some of the lessons you've learned as an administrator about what it means to support the kind of work that you and Kurt are both talking about that we want to see in classrooms.
Well, I call it the dark side because there are no kids on that side. It's dealing with adults all the time, and that can be, at least I know a kid's supposed to act that way. Sometimes adults let you down with the way they act, but doing the work I do now is really, really important to me because it centers the passions I have. I was hired at Richmond Public Schools as a senior advisor for a program called RVA Men Teach, was to get more male minority teachers and to do this equity work for the district. And year one was just a complete failure because often we get these equity roles, we get these diversity roles, but we don't have any power. We can only make suggestions. We can only say, hey, I think you should do this. And so what I learned is I need the keys to the car. I need to pick out the car if you want me to drive it. And so in year two, my district, the director of teacher and leader pathways, she resigned. And I was like, let me slide into this lane and take over her position, because what Teacher and Leader Pathways does, that's number one, that's university partnerships. So I get to work with all the universities that work with my school districts. That's student teachers, that's practicum students, that's residency programs. And so now I'm in charge of these programs that are bringing in the most teachers into our district. And so now I have the power to have some really, really hard conversations with some of these folks. And quite honestly, I am not liked in a lot of these circles because I'm going to have these conversations whether you want to have this conversation or not. I'm going to stand up and say, hey, that is not right. How do you expect to diversify this if we're not catering to the needs of a diverse community? And so, for example, we have residency programs, and I love our residency programs. I think residency models are some of the greatest things and produce some of the greatest teachers. Problem with the residency model is most people have to take a year off. I don't know many people of color or people who don't come from a background of privilege that can take an unpaid year to learn how to be a teacher. And so we got an immediate problem with this program. If we want to diversify the education workforce, then we need to pay these people. And so what we did was we went and lobbied the state, partnered with my HBCU, Virginia State University. We partnered with another HBCU, Virginia Union University. And we started the first HBCU paid teacher residency program, in which we're paying these teachers as instructional assistants, as substitute teachers for a full year to give them a wage while they're learning to be teachers. And so it's been really successful having these programs, sitting down with our partners, because we're in a regional partnership with a lot of different organizations. And I'll tell this story and I'll probably get in trouble for it, but I don't care. But last week we had a ceremony. And when we, at the end of the ceremony, we had one teacher from our district who made it through the ceremony. And our district was the only majority minority district in this partnership. And so the next day we come to a meeting, and the person who runs the program comes up to me, hey, we need to do a better job of getting more of your district teachers in and getting more minority teachers into this program. I was like, cool. You do realize it's 7 other partners in this. It's not just my responsibility to get more minority teachers in this program. It's every district, because the reality was we were 1 for 1 with minorities. We had 100%. Everybody else, they were batting 0, 10. So why are you coming up to us saying it's our responsibility? And so when you do this work, you have to go in understanding not everyone's going to like you. Not everyone is going to be receptive to your ideas. But if you always keep students-centered, keep teacher-centered, and keep your core values centered, know who you are, know that when people push back and say, we're not going to do this, cool, I'm still going to do this in a way. I'm going to find a way to make it happen. And you really need those voices at the table. So now when I have these conversations and meetings, what I find out is that now there are partners in other districts that are starting to speak up, starting to say things. And so now I'm not just fighting this battle alone. And that's really what it's all about. Like you said, sometimes you got to flip the table over to get your voice heard. But then ultimately, if you're flipping the table over for the rights of students to have a better education, I'm comfortable with it. Like I tell people, I've been fired 3 times for, standing up for students. And so I don't care. It's a teacher shortage. I'll be all right. My license is current. I'll be okay.
It strikes me, Rodney, that this is coming full circle to the lessons that your mom taught you. Yeah. Because I'm hearing relationships, I'm hearing community, I'm hearing pay attention to the people around you. And I hear that in the work that you're doing. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Rodney, Kurt this year has spent a lot of time talking about something that's really important to him, and he has oftentimes used the phrase, I still have hope. Before I ask Kurt what that means to him, I would love to hear from you what that phrase means to you. I still have hope. What does that mean to you?
Kurt has a lot of hope in people, and I really admire his attitude and his belief in people. I'm not quite so optimistic on that front. I don't necessarily believe that people will do the right thing. Honestly, I think most people are selfish and are going to make the selfish decision. But I have faith in the resistance. I have faith in the people are going to stand up and say, you're not going to do this to me. You know, I have faith that when enslaved black folks weren't allowed to read, those folks that risked life and limb to say, I'm going to teach you to read. I have faith that when, you know, schools are being segregated, the thousands and thousands and millions of black teachers who said, no, we're going to give our kids an equal education, even though we're not being funded, we're not getting the same amount of resources. I have faith in our LGBTQ teachers who say, no, you're not going to pass these type of laws on us. We're going to rally. I'm going to get kids to rally. You are not going to do this. And so I don't have so much as hope in the other folks to do right. I have faith in the people that will resist what is wrong. And that's what always been American history.
Love it. And I think Rodney made a great point on that. My hope relies or is within students. That's where my hope comes from, where there have been, in my 25 years of teaching, my students are absolutely brilliant. Brilliant. Those students who are the epitome of what a good student looks like, behave like, and those students who might have behavior issues. But every single one of them is absolutely brilliant. And that's where my hope comes from. My hope is within my students. As I've been traveling the country, students across this nation are so brilliant, are so passionate, are so engaging, are advocates, are social justice works. That's where my hope comes from. It comes from young people in the classroom who are saying that, no, we're not taking this, we are learning about this, and we're going to do something about it. That's where my hope comes from.
Yeah, I agree. I have more faith and hope in kids than I do some of the adults, because we see some of the things that are going on in this country right now. So I have faith that this next generation will say, hey, you're not going to do it. But I also don't want to fall into the trap of not holding adults accountable for the stuff that they're doing. We still need to hold each other accountable for the way we're treating kids.
Yes.
And I'll say a lot of my hope comes from sitting with people like you, with both of you, right? Because I see the work that you're doing, your passion, your enthusiasm. It's just, you know, that is compelling. And so I think there's hope for teachers who get to see themselves in you as well. Yeah. So we've got some questions from the audience. So let's take one of those. Let me start with this one at the top from Adrian. So Adrian, thanks for asking your question. With such long and storied careers, how do you stay current with the latest research and best practices in education? And what resources do you use to do so? So how do you learn? How do you learn? Where do you go to learn?
In education, you got to have your network.
Yes.
You got to have your people who you rely upon, who are the latest and experts in each subject. It's okay to not be up to date on the latest research and the latest this, but in your circle, you should have someone who is up to date. Pick a lane. You know, education is this varied highway. If you try to go and stay in every lane, you're going to crash. Pick your lane, stay in it, but also run with a pack who are running in their own lane, and rely on them when you don't know something, but also be there to support them if they need you.
Totally agree with Rodney. The best practices of me learning is talking to other teachers, attending PDs, reading, right? Read about what's happening in that content area.
Absolutely. Constantly learning, constantly connecting.
Lifelong learners.
Absolutely. Let's take one more. This one is from Caitlin. When it comes to burnout and retention, what changes would you like to see to teachers' scheduling and staffing that would make the profession more sustainable?
Time. Teachers need time, right? Time to plan. That's my biggest takeaway. A lot of teachers are burned out because teachers have 5 and 6 preps right in a row. No time to plan except for the weekends, and it's kind of difficult when you don't have time.
Money. we need to be paid for our labor, paid what we're worth. Right now, there's the American Teacher Act that's been introduced by Congresswoman Frederick, I always struggle with her name, Congresswoman Wilson from Florida, but it's to raise the minimum salary in America to $60,000, and those who are already at $60,000 will get cost of living adjustments based on their area. That's really, really important because, of course, you don't have time when you have to go work a second job so that you can pay your bills. And so we really need to invest in teachers. We need to invest in school infrastructure. My district, the average building is 50-plus years old. How can we prepare kids for the 21st century when they're in 19th century buildings? And so we really need investment. We need opportunity. We really need to sort of like I always say after World War II, we had a Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe. That's my history teacher coming out at me. But we need a Marshall Plan in education that focuses on teacher retention, infrastructure, curriculum development, strategic science-based curriculum development. We need to hold these universities accountable for what they're producing. We really need an overhaul of the teaching profession that centers students, teachers, and parents. Let's get the politics out of it. Let's get the lawmakers out of it. Let's make an investment on the biggest stakeholders we have.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it also strikes me that there's a flexibility that's also necessary within the context of school, right? And the way that we organize it. The more rigid we become, the more of a difficulty we create for ourselves. So
Most definitely.
Definitely that flexibility.
Can we do that next question at the top there?
Of course we can.
I'm going to try
From
not
Nicole?
to. Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Nicole wants to know, what do you see as the biggest challenges to diversifying our teacher workforce, and what solutions do you see to address those challenges?
All right, how much time y'all got? But no, seriously, we have some significant challenges to diversifying the teacher workforce, and one of the biggest internal challenges I found is that we have to be comfortable with diversifying the workforce. Because we can say, hey, let's get more teachers and let's get more diversity, but what happens when that diversity threatens your position? Equity work is all good until you have to get uncomfortable or you have to give up something. And so a lot of times in education, when we are challenged with something that is unfamiliar to us, we tend to put up a roadblock. And the reality is diversity in education, especially educational leadership and teachers, that is challenging to some folks. And so therefore, I think teachers need to address who they are, understand the positions, the power they wield, understand their biases, understand the things about them that make them click. Because if we're talking about diversifying the workforce, it starts with, one, creating better situations for the students that are in the classroom. Most diverse students are the ones having the worst experiences. And so they don't see teaching as a viable career field. And so we need to work on that. We need to work on checking our biases when it comes to hiring practices. We need to check our biases when it comes to who's getting into the schools of education. We need to check our biases when it comes to licensure and certification and how we're a number of different roadblocks in the way for that limit our diverse workforce. But also right now, what we need to do more than anything is we need to check these politicians. Too many politicians are comfortable with saying anything out of their mouth about any population, whether it be Black, our LGBTQ population, our Latinx, our immigrant population. They are too comfortable saying things that are outright racist, sexist, homophobic, and xenophobic. And so we, as a collective body, we need to challenge them. Not challenge them, we need to check them. And we need to say that, no, you will not say this about our students. You will not attempt to pass this legislation because it is harmful. And as long as we continue to do that and people see that power, then the diversity will start to take care of itself because they're going to see power in the workforce, and that's what attracts people.
There's nothing I could say. He said it all. Rodney, of course, really tell it like it is. One thing I would like to say, is to eliminate the microaggression, right?
Yes.
The microaggression within schools is really harmful in regards to trying to diversify the teaching profession.
Black male teachers are not just disciplinarians. Stop sending us the bad kids. Stop sending us the kids that you struggle with. But we can handle that, but we're also masters of pedagogy.
Yes.
We're also whatever our students need us to be. And so that's what he means by microaggressions. I want to name it. That's what microaggressions are. When you send the kid, I can't do nothing with this kid. Let's send them to this teacher who looks like him, who has the same background as him or her. That's a microaggression, whether you realize it or not. Start checking yourself and say, what can I do to better build a relationship? Or simply going to that teacher and say, what are you doing that's working? Can you lead a PD on helping our students? And so that's what it means by microaggressions.
Absolutely.
Because I feel like sometimes we throw these words out and people don't understand what exactly it is. So we have to name it in order for people to understand what's going on.
Absolutely. I want to look at this question at the bottom from Howard. How do you, as a National Teacher of the Year, engage family engagement struggles? And what advice would you give other teachers who want to bridge that gap between families and community?
Open dialogue. That's one thing I try to do within my community of Oberlin, is have this open dialogue to make sure that parents in the community feel as though the school district is a part of who they are as a community. A lot of times we separate community in the schools, and community and the schools should go hand in hand. So what I do, which I am proud of, if parents, cannot make it to parent-teacher conferences, I go to them. See, that's connecting the community in the schools, where there's a lot of times where parents don't feel comfortable going into the schools. We throw out a lot of jargon, a lot of educational words where parents don't feel comfortable with. So if we could keep it authentic, real with our parents and go to them, I think we could bridge this gap.
Absolutely.
Perfectly said. Remove the barriers and understand the power dynamic. Understand your power dynamic when you're dealing with families, when you're dealing with students, when you're dealing with anyone. As a teacher, you have power. And so you need to understand that power is often intimidating to some folks. That power often gets in the way of building the relationships. So like Kurt said, go to the community. Don't have parent-teacher conferences in your school. Have parent-teacher conferences in the community in neutral spots where parents can feel welcome. Because reality is that school may be a trigger to that parent. I don't know if any of you all seen the America to Me documentary, but there's a powerful scene where the parent is going to talk to her son's teachers, and she's having PTSD walking down the hallway from the way she was treated in that school. That should be a powerful moment that, wait a minute, there's a power dynamic that makes parents uncomfortable. So whatever that power dynamic is, talk to your parents, talk to your community, and find out, and then remove it, because you can't build a good relationship when there's an unequal power dynamic.
Absolutely. The three of us, along with the 2023 State Teachers of the Year, were all together just a few weeks ago in California. In one of Rodney's talks to the teachers, he said that teaching is a revolutionary act. Kurt, I'm curious what that means to you.
Matter of fact, has everyone heard Rodney today, right? You could tell that he's about to work the business. It means to decolonize education, in my opinion. It means to decolonize education. The education that has been traditional, that status quo education, is not working for all students. That means what we must do is transform education to bring in the stories and the narratives of all, instead of having this single story that has been passed down from generation to generation. So reimagining education reimagining that everyone sitting in a seat in a classroom could see themselves, could be engaged, and to have a possibility of opportunities of their liking. That's how I see it, decolonizing education.
First of all, those aren't just my words. I want to shout out Sharif right there. Those are his words. I got them from him, you know. But ultimately, we have to do what's right by our kids. We have to educate our kids because right now we're in dangerous political times, you know, where you see democracy is fading, fascism is slowly creeping in. You know, and you're seeing all these attacks on education, true education, and CRT. All of this is just fear-mongering, you know, because they know our society is unjust. The most dangerous thing to an unjust society is an educated population. And so that's why they're going after everything right now, is because they're trying to maintain a power structure that isn't sustainable. So they're going to do whatever is possible, and the way to do that is to just dumb down and make our children not understand the history, understand that they can do whatever they want, and that they are more powerful than any politician.
Yes, absolutely. And certainly this work is the responsibility of everyone
Yes.
in the system, right?
Yes.
It is everyone in the system, and I think that's important to name as well. So we have just a few minutes left. I was wondering if we could end with kind of just a little bit of a lightning round, maybe just some really human questions. Okay. Not that these haven't been human questions, but all right. Okay, so let's start with, so quick answers, like 1 to 2 words-ish. Okay, something you're reading.
I'm rereading Booker T. Washington, The Atlanta Exposition.
Cool.
Yes.
Teacher Diversity and Student Success by Constance Lindsay.
Nice. How about something you're listening to?
De La Soul just came out on Apple Music, so I'm listening to De La Soul right now.
The Redacted History podcast is just a podcast with a lot of little-known history facts.
Absolutely. Somebody that you are learning from?
Rodney Robinson.
Not to sound cheesy, but Kurt Russell.
No.
How about something that's bringing you joy?
Professionally, Sarah? I'm sorry.
It could be whatever you want. Something that's bringing you joy.
My children.
I got a 4-month-old nephew who just loves me because I have cheeks like him. So he just grabs my cheeks like everyone does him every time I hold him. But yeah, that's my joy right now.
Wonderful. And the message you would like to leave your audience with in a word?
Grace.
Agitate.
You can gracefully agitate.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Passive aggressive.
Yeah.
Well, Rodney and Kurt, thank you so much for sharing your spirit, your enthusiasm, your passion, and your incredible work. It is truly just an honor for me to always learn from you and sit beside you and be part of this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you, South by
Thank you so
Southwest.
much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.